Hello, everybody. I'm Ralph Barker and Laura McCullough. You know, I'm having so much fun doing these programs, just the way we banter and talk and disagree and have fun. And Laura's one of the smartest people around. She tells me that all the time. So, just kidding.
I'm going to tell y'all a joke. You may have not seen it before. So Ralph has this new translation of Genesis that he let me borrow, and it's really cool because it's the literal Hebrew, so it's very literal. We were talking about, he was telling me about it, and he said, you know, it's so funny because it describes human beings as soil creatures, and I said, Ralph, you're my favorite dirtbag.
She was so quick too. I mean, that was good thinking. But that is interesting. Soil creatures, you know, we're taken from the dirt, so I mean that makes sense. But I guess you ladies are not soil creatures because you were taken from the rib. Is that right?
That's a whole different video.
We'll have to do a whole nother show on the ribs, know about the ribs. But
well, the word in Hebrew there is curve, and there's lots of different thoughts on what that's referring to. And is that the curve of the helix of the DNA? Is that a literal rib? Because men don't have one less rib. For a long time, you know, medically they said that men had one less rib than women. They do not. So figuring out what that actually is, that's a very unique study.
That is interesting. Well, today we're going to talk about...
we should have called our channel Rabbit Trails instead of Focal
Points.
Well,
that's what makes it fun. We can go down all kind of rabbit trails. But you're familiar with the scripture. I'm not sure. I'll let Laura tell where it is, where Jesus says from the cross, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. I guess that's how you pronounce it. My God, why have thou forsaken me? What most scriptures say, but let Laura pick up from there.
I had said I would pick up on this point in a previous video because this scripture is something that I would say I'm passionate about, but I'm passionate about everything. Y'all that know me in person know that I don't have off switches. So but this one in particular, and I don't know, we can have a discussion. Actually, you know what? I would like, Ralph, if you would just present maybe some of the concepts of how it's been explained that Christ would be grieved that his Father had forsaken him, or because I don't want to just present the one position on it. I just have an interesting perspective on that particular verse.
Well, I don't know if this is what you're shooting for, but of course, when Jesus was on the cross, he was quoting from Psalm 22.
See, he stole my thunder. Look at that.
But yeah, so that's a lot of people don't know that. And I mean, they didn't even, when Psalm 22 was written, crucifixion hadn't been invented yet. And yet it clearly describes a crucifixion. Go back and look at Psalm 22.
Well, so what we'll do is I'll read the verse because I thought he was going to present something else. You might have heard that the verses so it's Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34. I'm going to read the one in Matthew. So it's 27:46, and it says, "And about the 9th hour, Yeshua cried out with a loud voice saying," the Greek, so Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, right?
I think.
That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? So some of your scriptures will have a little note there that says Psalms 22:1. And the reason is Jesus was not, you remember the Garden of Gethsemane. You remember him speaking to his Father. He said, you know, your will, not my will, be done. He had already sweated and cried and bled and been before the Father and accepted that this was what was coming. He said to Peter, will you drink from the cup that I'm about to endure, right? So he is not saying, God's forsaken me. He's not in his flesh or in his humanness. He's not afraid. What Christ is doing here is proclaiming what is happening to those in front of him. Those witnesses, any of the Pharisees that would have been there, we have to remember that it was commanded that the scriptures would be read in a set cycle. These people didn't have television and radio. They had the scrolls read every Sabbath in the synagogue. And so the culture, the people were far more familiar with their scriptures than we are as modern day believers, even though we have multiple copies of the Bible, because their culture was immersed in it and steeped in it. And so when he said that, people would have recognized what he was saying. So I'm going to read just some snippets out of Psalm 22, because the first line of Psalm 22 is, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's what Christ is quoting there. And it goes on to describe his death. It's the prophecy that was given of what would happen with Messiah. you're familiar with how many messianic prophecies are in the Psalms, are in the prophetic books. This is one of the ways that they knew they were looking for Messiah. And what he was doing, he was pointing to Psalm 22 and saying, this is me. You're watching this happen. You're watching this prophecy of Messiah fulfilled. I am the Son of God. I am the Lamb who is slain for the sins of the world. He's literally proclaiming himself to be the fulfillment of that verse. And so rather than it being something where he's crying out in agony and anguish, he's proclaiming who he is. And I think that sometimes we miss, because we don't have such an immersion in the scriptures, we miss these beautiful context clues. Because the reason that I'm passionate about this particular verse, that deeply alters how we view Jesus. The Jesus who is agonizing on the cross in fear, claiming that his Father had forsaken him, or the Jesus saying in power and authority, this prophecy is happening before your eyes. Those are two very different characters.
Yeah, and verse 16 in Psalm 22
Yes.
says, they pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. And that literally happened. And as I said on the previous program, you can't orchestrate something that these prophecies will be fulfilled.
Yes.
Might mention also that there is the official manuscript of the Eastern Church, you know, the Peshitta.
Yes.
And I like the way it translates that scripture. They say, my God, for this hour I've been spared.
Yes.
And that makes so much sense to me, because all through the New Testament, they're trying to kill Jesus and they can't do it. And God spared him so he could live long enough to die on the cross for us.
Yes.
See, that's what's so powerful about that. That particular translation is Peshitta. You can buy it. The Lamsa translation is the most popular. You can buy that on Amazon or eBay or whatever. Lamsa. He's someone who was brought up in the Middle East. He knows the idioms, which is very interesting. My wife's been reading through that book, that particular Bible this year. And she'll call me over now and then and say, look at this, look at that. It's different from most modern Bibles, but many times it makes a lot more sense to me, just to understand the scriptures.
Well, and that's consistent too. I was just looking up if Psalm 22:1, if there's something in the Hebrew. I use my sword just so that, you know, if you study and are interested in being more effective in your study, depending on which device you're using, there's two apps. One's called eSword. One's called My Sword. They're equivalent depending on if you use Android or Apple or on a desktop. But they're incredible. They're incredible tools for study. The ability to just look up the root of the Greek or the Hebrew and to dig into that. Now, it doesn't by any means make us language scholars, but it does give us clues to be able to understand better. But in the Peshitta, which you're talking about in that text, it's consistent with in Esther when it says, for such a time as this, right? You have been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. And that goes back to our last discussion about predestination, vessels for destruction, whether God preordains a time and place that we're going to be. And as Christians, we so often believe that. Actually, we have a few more minutes left on this concept. And so the idea of this being the time and place for which Christ was ordained, you know, in the concept of predestination, I wonder sometimes if there's a sliding scale. So I had mentioned before about it not being black and white. Oftentimes we divide things. It either is or it is not. What if there's a sliding scale for the degree to which your life is predestined? What if the more significant your role, such as Christ, because it is my belief, based on scripture, that every second of Christ's life, from conception to death to resurrection, was preordained step by step, encounter by encounter, word by word, to achieve the Father's purposes. Then we have the apostles, the patriarchs, men like David, or Samson, right? It says that Samson was allowed to stumble because the Father wanted to bring something against the Philistines. But then we have other instances where you have shared and I've shared that we know that free will is in operation. And so the question becomes, do we have less freedom the more in God's ultimate prophetic plan our lives are involved? Or is everyone, you know, and so that's just a question
I don't think God told me to wear this sweater. It was predestined. I don't think. But I mean, are these videos predestined, or is this just something out? Doesn't matter. I mean, it's just kind of like out there. It's just something we choose to do.
I hope that they matter. Just because I like y'all and I like him and I like doing this.
I think they matter. I think they matter. It's important. It's Yeah, it is. But predestination is a hard. You heard about the Presbyterian. Presbyterians believe in predestination. The one that fell down the stairs and said, "Boy, I'm glad that's over with." I don't think it goes that far.
Well, but here's the thing is that, I mean, I have stories from my life. I have moments that I know without a shadow of a doubt brought me to my walk with Christ, that brought me to where I am now, that brought me to my faith, that changed my faith and my direction, that ended up in a divine appointment. And so how to know which things are which, I think that this is why it's so important that we be good stewards of every single day. I think that when it says to be prepared in season and out of season, that when it says in the Shema to be considering his word when you lie down, when you rise up, when you walk along the way, when you're in your house, that to be diligent with your children, that all of those things to be purposeful, because we don't know which moments are and are not ordained.
Well, I, in my heart, I absolutely know that the way we met was predestined.
Absolutely.
I mean, I believe that. I don't know if we ever told the story. We may do it sometime. I'll tell you a real quick story about being ready in season, out of season. My wife and I, Susan, went up to Minneapolis to a church I had preached at before, and I told him I was coming up on vacation. I was just going to go to his church while I'm there. So we're sitting out there in the audience. I look up on the screen. It says, "Today's speaker, Ralph Barker." He hadn't said a word to me. So I had to be ready in season, out of season. I got up there and preached. In fact, I got Susan to sing first or something, so stall for a minute.
That's why we do this on the fly, because he's so good at that.
Yeah, right. Stall for a minute. But anyway, it was great.
If y'all ever see me do this, he asked me something I wasn't prepared for.
That's the fun of it. Again, thank y'all for tuning in. We enjoy doing this. We hope you do. Email us if you'd like to, vocalpointschannel@gmail.com, and we will put a response, and we'll start putting scriptures in too, because we don't have time to look them all up here, but you might want to go back and see while we're quoting certain things. Now, the next program is going to be our Christmas special. So we're not going to watch the clock as closely on that one. We're just going to go as long as we want to, and hopefully...
I'm going to try not to get in trouble.
Uh-oh. It should be fun. Come back. Thanks so much for watching. God bless you.